Hello, welcome to this session, the final one of the day. So I hope you're all energised and you've had coffee and you're still awake. And our panel is certainly energised, aren't you? We're all ready to go. I was just thinking, coming out here, we're talking about food security, and I was reminded of that line from Bob Marley, the singer, that a hungry man is an angry man.
Amen to that.
Exactly. And we know, when you look around the world, that it is often food scarcity or inflation that precipitates revolution. We've seen that all around our world. If we look at our world today, there are conflicts right now driven by food scarcity, and conflicts that are contributing to food scarcity. We look at the conflict in Ukraine, of course, and as a direct result of that, we're experiencing it even in wealthy countries like Australia, where we are paying more and supply lines are disrupted, and some of the things that we've taken for granted, we can no longer access. So that's what we're talking about today, endemic food insecurity, which is exploding into a global food crisis, affecting 9.9% of people globally at the moment. Food affordability is now a critical issue for large swathes of the global population. From 2019 to 2020, the number of undernourished people grew by as many as 161 million. Food security in agriculture underpins the livelihoods of 2.5 billion people, and many of those in low income and developing countries. At no other point in history has the agriculture sector been faced with such an array of familiar and unfamiliar risks interacting with this ever-changing world that we live in. And hungry people, of course, are those who are most impacted when disaster strikes because of the lack of resilience. So all of these things are feeding into each other. That's what we're going to be hearing from during this session. We'll be hearing from our speakers here. I want to direct you to begin with, though, because you will be able to participate in this session. If you can go to your conference app, you'll be able to vote on the poll questions that we'll be putting up. We'll put the poll questions up. You can see on your screens there how to access that. You can punch in your answer. I will then tell you whether or not you've had the correct answer, and then we'll go on to our first question and our first speaker. I'll begin with the first poll question of the day. In 2021, how many people experienced acute food insecurity? Is it A, around 5 million, B, around 50 million, or C, around 200 million? Is it A, is it B, or is it C? So I'll see what your votes are coming in now. A, B, or C. And there are some very, very clever people in the room, because yes, indeed, it is C, around 200 million. Our first speaker is going to speak to the impacts of food insecurity in her country of Timor-Leste. Dr. Maria Odetta Gutierrez graduated from Charles Darwin University in Environmental Science and Agriculture. Currently, she is the Director General of Agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries in Timor-Leste. Dr. Gutierrez has been working in the agriculture sector for almost 20 years and was also involved in the Integrated Crisis Management Centre for COVID-19 established by the government of Timor-Leste. Dr. Gutierrez, the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 2 calls for an end to hunger. To this end, it calls for food security, improved nutrition and sustainable agricultural practices. Last year, Timor-Leste was faced with 2 crises: COVID-19 and climate-induced severe flooding. How did Timor-Leste cope with that situation? And what learning from these 2 crises can be used to implement your country's pathway to strengthen its food systems, improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture?
Thank you, Stan. Good afternoon, everyone.
I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me for this conference. In this conference, I would like to share some information about the impact of the COVID-19 and also severe flooding that happened in Timor-Leste last year. In general, Timor-Leste is an agrarian country, which is the population is only 1.3 million, and 71% of the population living in a rural area. From that, 66% of the population, they are engaging in the agriculture sector. The total area of cultivation is about 260,000 hectares, but the household only, they have the land average in only 1.5 hectares. Agriculture sector in Timor-Leste is contributing to the economic sector, which is 50% of the population are working in the agriculture sector. Apart from that, we face the big challenges in the agriculture sector. For example, the real condition of agriculture, the land of the agriculture, 40% of the land, which is 40% of them are slope, which is the coverage of the very poor soil fertility. Much effort have been made by the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, for example, providing high-yield seeds, providing machineries, providing tools for fishing, vaccination services, also providing irrigation and recuperation, construction of irrigation, as well as establishing the Farmers Association in order to increase the production and productivity, particularly for the staple food as rice and maize for our national consumption. In terms of the impact of the COVID last year, as we face the impact of the COVID-19 globally and also locally, as well as the severe flooding that happened in Timor-Leste. The impact of COVID in the agriculture sector with the restriction of the COVID to contain COVID, but cause a severe economic loss for the farmer. For example, farmers cannot access to the market to sell their production. Farmers also cannot go to the field in terms of increasing the production of vegetable as well as raising animals in the field. And also, prior to the COVID in last year, we also faced a big impact of the infestation of African swine fever, which is led to the 260,000 heads of pig, which is 28% of the pig population in Timor-Leste. In Timor-Leste, the pig, not only for the consumption, as the value is also for some custom and our culture needs. Apart from that, the climate hazard, like erratic rainfall, floods, droughts, and things, also gave an impact for the irrigation schemes. Last year, there were 2,600 hectares of paddy cultivation out of 22,000 hectares were lost, damaged by the floods. In maize cultivation, we lost about 1,500 out of 37,000 hectares of paddy. And also we faced a big infestation of fall armyworm. This case of these things also impacted, the COVID also impacted for the vaccination campaign due to the delay of the campaign time. So from these two cases that happened in Timor-Leste, we call it is a crisis that we feel the big impact in Timor-Leste. So what are the lessons learned that we take from these two crises? COVID, I think COVID offered an opportunity for a reflection to the importance of resilience in emergencies. Agriculture and agriculture industry have a potential to consider and take this opportunity to reevaluate and also to consider and also to establish a proper strategic plan based on the COVID impact to develop agriculture more properly, to respond for the food consumption as well to generate income to our farmers, back to promote and then to establish the new condition in response to the COVID infection. And also, I think the lesson learned from COVID is to give us more opportunity to reduce the dependency to the import rice, because Timor-Leste were still import rice from other countries. I think it's 60% importation of rice. But this COVID gave us a lesson, so we can more cultivate in expanding area of the paddy land, as well as maize and other steppe crops, legumes, and horticulture. This give us opportunity, and particularly for the farmers, they will have more chance in terms of increasing their land of production, increasing the productivity, as well as they can generate more income from this. When we cut the dependency, that gives more chance to create more chance to farmers, particularly in the rural areas. In terms of another issue related to the lesson learned, I think related to this understanding the food system resilience, from this we can identify what, how, and the principles that can be useful in improving our understanding of food system resilience, and it links to the COVID restriction. Timor-Leste also became as a state member of food system. Last year, the government appointed 2 national conveners that are working very closely with UN agencies, development partners, and other stakeholders, like private sector, entrepreneurs, and also civil society, academic, in order to identify what are the aspects that contribute to the food system. And also we develop a Timor-Leste food system pathway, which can respond to the impact of the COVID, as well as the flooding impact for the Timor-Leste Indian agriculture sector. Related to this disaster risk reduction, I think we, Timor-Leste in agriculture sector, we also work very closely with the civil protection, because we established a task force when we faced the severe flooding. So we are working together based on our regulation, and also we established the team in order to face the displacement, to face the impact of the agriculture. So we were working based on the team, and also we are more resilient and working very closely in order to work how we can face this problem by implementing climate change resilience activities. I think that's all for Timor. And also in the agriculture sector, we also apply conservation agriculture. Is not only as a transformative for agriculture system, farming system, and also is a resilience to climate change risks, but also helps to transform our system, agriculture system, slash and burn in Timor-Leste, which is into a sustainable, permanent, stabilized farming system. I think once we fulfill all the requirements, we can have a good and a proper food system according to the climate change risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to our second speaker now. But as I do, I'll put another question to you so you get a chance to vote again. What percentage of economic losses caused by drought is absorbed by the agriculture sector? Is it 26%, B, 56%, or F, 83%? We'll see your results very quickly on the screen. Is it A, B, or C? Okay, the results seem to be in, and yes, and C again is the correct answer. It is 83%. Our second speaker will speak to the importance of local action in managing and responding to these kinds of events. Charles Oloka has worked for 15 years on community development in Solomon Islands. One of his most memorable achievements is the coordination and completion of the first ever National Agricultural Survey report in Solomon Islands in 2019. Charles is a graduate of the University of South Pacific with postgraduate studies in economics and a bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics. Mr. Oloka, the 3 C's, COVID, conflict and climate are very much a global discourse shaping how we forge ahead with global food security. However, can we identify local solutions to these problems, and what do they look like?
Thank you. Thank you, Stan, for this question. Ladies and gentlemen, to answer these fundamental questions, I will draw heavily on my experience in Solomon Islands, as well as civil society such as World Vision, who is working in Solomon Islands for the past 35 years. As we know, Solomon Islands stretches from Papua New Guinea to Vanuatu and is very, very vulnerable to natural disasters. Solomon Islands is an island country, and it's very remote. Many of the islands are very remote and far from the capital, Honiara. As we know, 74% of the population live in the rural areas, and by rural areas, we meant that people, communities, does not have the infrastructure to support their livelihood. The population of the country, Solomon Islands, is less than 1 million. By 2019 estimate, it was 721,000, and it's mostly concentrated, just like the first speaker said, in the rural areas and based on agriculture sector. Solomon Island is ranked second in last year's World Ranking in Risk report due to its vulnerability and exposure to tropical cyclones, tsunamis, flash flooding, and earthquakes, to name a few. The civil society World Vision has worked collaboratively with the national government, with the provincial government. Provincial government is the government that's most closest to the communities. Out of 10 provinces in Solomon Islands, World Vision has worked in 7 out of 10 provinces in areas such as livelihood, disaster risk reduction, education, and health. So the question is, how does World Vision, who is working in Solomon Islands, addressing these issues posed by the 3 Cs? First, I will outline the first reason, and I will add another 3 reasons behind. The first point I will raise is climate-smart agriculture. As we know, 80% of the population in Solomon Islands are in the rural area. World Vision partners with the national government, as well as leaders in the Provincial Disaster Management Office, the Women's Development Desk, the Provincial Council of Women, local NGOs such as Custom Garden Association, to promote the type of agriculture that reduces wastage in the rural area. As we can know, in the rural area, agriculture is placed or is done in all customary lands. To steer away from slash and burn, which is the usual practice, World Vision partners with civil society organizations such as the Custom Garden Association, which enable the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock to have efficient networks in distribution of seeds, seedlings to the far and outreach islands. Through these partnerships, communities learn organic farming, nursery making, pest and disease control, which help them to make their community more resilient. Furthermore, traditional knowledge of maintaining resilient crops for hard times such as during COVID-19, as well as during prolonged period of bad weather, is maintained and resuscitated. The second point I will raise is through simple food processing and preservation techniques at the household level. Now, this is very important, seeing that Solomon Island is stretched wide here in the Pacific Ocean, from Papua New Guinea down to Vanuatu. World Vision, together with private sector, identify and facilitates and try to expand traditional simple drying techniques for root crops such as cassava, sweet potatoes, and fish to prolong their shelf life. The drying and preservation of this food enable villages to use during situations such as COVID-19 and periods of tropical cyclones such as TC Harold. Also, civil society such as World Vision collaborate with communities to help promote entrepreneurship in the communities and to engage youth at the village level. With collaboration with communities, churches, saving clubs are managed to be formed and upskill to enable village savings to be done with women, people with disabilities, in all the communities. From the report, each club consists of 25 members, and we have on record 75 saving clubs operating currently in all the islands that I have mentioned. And since January to this month, the saving clubs managed to save 250,000 AUD, which, looking at the small islands and the isolated villages, this is quite significant at the community level. During COVID-19 lockdown, some groups used their savings to sustain basic family needs, enabling members to purchase rice, basic food from the shops. It has been reported in the provinces, in the isolated provinces, they managed to use their savings to start other businesses. And in one of our most populated provinces in Solomon Islands, called Malaita, actually the youth are engaged in savings activities that enable them to expand their social activities in the communities. My fourth point is economic empowerment from the grassroots level. Civil societies, organizations such as World Vision, with technical knowledge from the private sector and the government, are able to produce what we call producers groups. These producers groups are cocoa farmers, coconut farmers, farmers who are producing coconut oil, fishermen who are fishing in the communities, in the villages, and entrepreneurs who are operating out of the villages. We have experts who train these farmers, these fishermen, to enable them to maintain quality of their products and to seek better markets, both locally and overseas markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I may conclude. Let me say that local solutions to these global problems require commitments and collaboration of every stakeholders, both government, donors, regional forums, academia, and most importantly, to be successful, everyone needs to listen to the voices of the communities. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Now, before our third speaker, let's go again to the conference app, and you can vote on our third poll for the session. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. The question is, what do you know about food loss and waste? Select the correct answer below. A, globally, around 14% of food produced is lost between harvest and retail. B, an estimated 17% of total global food production is wasted. C, food loss and waste account for 8% of all greenhouse gas emissions. D, about 21 to 37% of total greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to the food system. And E, all of the above. So I'll just give you a moment for those to come in. You're at 100% so far. You're getting every single answer right. So this is not fair. We've got a far, far too informed room. So it is E, all of the above. Our third speaker will speak to this intersection, precisely this question about climate change and food security. Dr. Viliame Lese is a senior lecturer at the Pacific Centre for Environment and Sustainable Development at the University of South Pacific. He has conducted research and published widely in the field of risk resilience in agriculture, food security, and climate change loss and damage in Pacific Island countries. Dr. Lese is a member of the Pacific Resilience Partnership Task Force and a man of the region, being Samoan by birth, Tuvaluan by citizenship, and currently a resident of Fiji. You're covering every base. We'll give you honorary Australian citizenship, and then you'll be able to speak for us all. Let's go to the question. The IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land reveals with high confidence that food security will be increasingly affected by projected future climate change, with models projecting increases of up to 183 million additional people at risk of hunger. What can be done to accelerate the shift to climate-resilient food systems to avert this catastrophe, particularly for the Pacific?
Thank you very much, Stan. Talo falava, everyone. It's very good to see you all here these later hours of the evening. The Small Island Development States Samoan Pathway and FAO framework for food and nutritional security in the Pacific actually prioritize and recognize the need to accelerate actions in order to address food insecurity in the Pacific. And food insecurity in the Pacific, Stan, is quite interesting because it's not about the lack of food. When we talk about food security in the Pacific, they always say, like, well, no one is dying of lack of food. No one is hungry. That's why we're always happy in the Pacific. But the issue in the Pacific is more on nutritional security. It's the overnutrition, as you see. So when they talk about accelerating actions, they were talking about how to address non-communicable diseases and how to look at the resilience of the food system. And bringing it down to the topic of climate change, there is a very strong relationship between the Pacific Island food systems, whether it's traditional or contemporary, and also the weather, the season, and the climate. And one thing we should recognize is that climate change is one of the many factors and one of the many risks that affect food systems, not just in the Pacific Islands, but also in the world. But one important factor about climate change, it is a multiplier. It exacerbates all the other risks. And it has a lot of impacts on the food system in the Pacific, historically, now, and also in the future. And our Pacific Island leaders have recognized climate change as an existential threat to the Pacific, people, cultures, land, and also our food as well. So it is very important to talk about it, that to address climate change and to accelerate actions to address climate change, we should address it in the middle of all the other risks, because they are all connected. All the other risks add on the vulnerability of the food system and the high exposure of the food system to the adverse impacts of climate change. And when we talk about climate change here, we are looking at sea level rise, we're looking at saltwater inundation, the loss of land, ocean acidification, and also we're looking at the impacts of sudden onset hazards, very increased frequency and also the intensity of floods, droughts, and also a lot of Category 5 cyclones that we have faced in the Pacific. So I'm not going to talk more about the impacts, because that is well established. But I have an idea of accelerating, of what we need to do in order to answer the question. And I think we need to think forward, act local, and act global. Okay, let me break it down a little bit. To think forward, I think recognizes the fact that we have lived in a very different environment where all our systems have developed, whether traditionally over 4,000 years, 3,000 years, in a little bit much more stable climate. And now we are dealing with a crazy climate. And it's not just now, but it's also looking forward into the future. So we do need to understand how climate risks now and into the future, based not only on our traditional understanding, but also the use of models. It's interesting that you mentioned the IPCC report. We really hope that in a very near future, maybe Australia and New Zealand can give us some money, we will be able to do modeling to understand what 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius increase really mean for the growth of taro, really mean for the growth of sweet potato, really mean for the growth of those fruit trees in the Pacific, and also the growth rates of the fish, and also all of those important food production systems that we do have. as well as transportation, storage, and consumption of food. Most importantly, as I mentioned, we do have a nutritional problem. How is the future climate change affecting or impacting the starch content of taro and all these vitamin contents of all these food sources? Because from the health perspective, they say you go back and eat local. What if you go back and eat local and then the contents of those are decreasing? We have no idea about that. And that knowledge system, that information, that data is needed to be generated, not just for now, but also looking forward. This is why we need to do that, because building the resilience is a decision-making process. And we do need all this information to inform the decisions, not just for the risk, but also the solutions in order for us to be able to face the crazy dynamic climate change. Because the one thing we don't want to do is to accelerate maladaptation. And there's a very thin line between very good adaptation and very bad adaptation. And that's why we really need this important sort of data and information in order for us to make really proper plans, not just 5, 20, 30 years and onwards. We do not have much resources, so having this right information will help us to know where we should invest these limited resources we have to address the vulnerabilities of our food systems in the Pacific. Act Local, my brother has spoken really, really well and shared examples of Act Local. Two important points I would want to add on that on addressing the resilience of our food systems is that one is just not about increasing the production systems that we do have, but also increasing it for the purpose of not just selling for the income, but also for nutrition and nutritious diets. We did a research during COVID-19 with International Fund for Agriculture Development, and then we look at production of food was very high all around the Pacific Islands, but the dietary diversity was down, was declined compared to pre-COVID-19 times. So usually we say increase production of local foods, increase consumption of local food, but there was a problem. The production, the food sources that were distributed was taro, cassava, sweet potato, yam. So very high production of all these 4 different crops, but they all belong to one food group. They're all starchy food group. So there was a really important lesson there, diversify. And there are a lot of non-government organizations, like Friend in Fiji, Mori Tonga Trust in Tonga, the Custom Garden, as my brother Charles mentioned, and a lot of other NGOs and civil societies that are working on this across the region in partnership with governments and development partners. Now, the second part of this Act Local that I really need to emphasize is the revival of our traditional systems, the traditional foundation of resilience of our food systems. And that was really important because it came out strongly during the COVID-19. Because we faced the COVID-19, we had Tropical Cyclone Harold, Tropical Cyclone Yasa, Tropical Cyclone Ana, rising sea level, poverty, and all the other problems. And the traditional system, the traditional safety network, helped. And this, the recognition of this is important because it facilitates the access to land, facilitates the access to fishing resources, and also access to forests and the wild harvest. Now, coming down to the Act Global, this is in recognition that Pacific Island countries are net importers of food. We do import a lot of food, and then the funny thing is that when our countries became independent, from a political or governance perspective, we became highly dependent in terms of food systems. And then we import a lot of food from East Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, America, Europe. I'm not going to comment on the quality of the food that we receive from you guys, but I think the most important, they mentioned about the connectivity of the system. We really need to work together to address the resilience in all of our countries. We need to collaborate because when there's a drought in Australia, we have some problems of the supply of the wheat to get the flour, and also the price skyrocket. It's the same when we have a flood in Asia, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and some of these countries where we get the food from. Importantly as well, we also supply a lot of food. We're the biggest producer of tuna and supply the tuna all across the world. So working together to build a resilience of the global food system is very, very critical. And in order to do that, we need really good partnerships. It's not cheap. Sometimes we talk resilience as if it's on our fingertips, but it's not cheap. It needs very good capacity, technical capacity. It needs a lot of resources, a lot of partnership, and everybody working together. But why I value knowledge and information, I want to end with a story. We did a study in the northern part of Fiji, highland part of Fiji, called Naitasiri, and we spoke to about 70-year-old farmer about his experience of resilience and whether there is any change, or did he change anything, and what was the driver for that change. He told us a very interesting story. He said in the 1960s and the 1970s, he was doing all the traditional farming system, doing all the organic farming system. And then the white man came and told him, you are doing the wrong thing. Your farming system is old-fashioned. If you want to produce more, change to these crops, use these fertilizers. In the 1990s, the white man came to him again and said, go back to your traditional farming system. That's the best way of farming. And then go and plant your traditional crops and raise your traditional livestock. They are the sources for your resilience. And this man said, that is very interesting, because I cannot go back. I have lost a lot of my traditional knowledge. I have lost a lot of traditional crops. And I don't even know how to cook some of those traditional crops. So the moral of the story, what I'm saying, is just to tie it back to the beginning, Stan, is that with right information, right data, right technology, and right resources, we can actually make a change. Not just a change for now, not just a production in order to gain money, but the change in order to food secure our Pacific, food secure Asia, food secure Australia and New Zealand, because what we always say, the Pacific, save the world. So, thank you very much, Whakatai Lava. Thank you.
Thank you for the story. We're going to go to our fourth speaker now, but before that, again, a poll question. Is it true that 25% of global crop production is lost to pests and diseases each year? It's a very simple one. It's just an A or B, true or false. 25% of global crop production is lost to pests and diseases each year, true or false? And guess what? You're wrong this time. The answer is false. It's actually a massive 40%. And as the climate crisis deepens, scientists forecast the problem will get worse despite advances in technology and control methods. So to speak to this, let's go to our fourth speaker. Robin Alders is an honorary professor with the Development Policy Centre and the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions with the Australian National University, and a senior consulting fellow with the Chatham House Global Health Program. For over 30 years, Robin has worked closely with smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia and the Pacific, with an emphasis on the development of sustainable disease control in animals in rural areas in support of food security and poverty alleviation. Robin's current research and development interests include food and nutrition security, One Health, gender equity and policy action. So Robin, more than ever, compounded impacts of COVID increased climate-related disasters and continued pest and disease, raising the importance of multi-hazard and One Health approaches. Could you share some insights on how an integrated approach could help advance integrated pandemic and disaster-resilient food systems?
Thanks very much, Stan, and good afternoon to you all. In addition to the excellent points made by my fellow panellists, there are three key messages that I hope you'll take away with you from my short talk. Firstly, food security and food systems are complex and can both exacerbate and mitigate existential risks. Secondly, secure access to safe and nutritious food underpins human civilization as we know it. And thirdly, Achieving food and nutrition security requires effective and efficient intersectoral collaboration. Okay, so now I'm going to unpack each of these points. The first point, food security and food systems are complex and can both exacerbate and mitigate the existential risks we are facing. This complexity is reflected in the range of food systems that underpin food security. And it's really important that our discussions and policies recognize that some food systems are more ecologically sustainable, more equitable, and more likely to contribute to healthy diets than others. We need to focus on the promotion of food systems that are at least carbon neutral and preferably contributing to both carbon sequestration and the production and distribution of safe food that efficiently meets the nutritional requirements of people of all genders and ages. My second point is that secure access to safe and nutritious food underpins human civilization as we know it. In many countries, we tend to overlook the fact that farmers and fishers are key contributors to human health and society. Without them, the broad range of human endeavours beyond the farm and the fishing boat would simply not be possible. Clearly, none of us could sit here today unless farmers and fishers had produced food surplus to their needs and value chain workers had delivered it to us here in South Brisbane. And beyond meeting our own nutritional needs, history has repeatedly taught us that a secure food supply is the most potent weapon of peace, the most potent weapon of peace available to humanity. The equitable provision of food security could more than halve human conflicts. And yes, you heard correctly, achieving food security for all could more than halve the number of human conflicts. And now to my third and final point. Achieving food and nutrition security requires effective and efficient intersectoral collaboration. Last year, the UNDRR published the hazard information profiles as a supplement to their technical report on hazard definition and classifications. The food-related hazards highlighted in these profiles provide a clear indication of the intersectionality of food security. In a world with multiple threats and limited budgets, to efficiently meet these challenges, it's vital that we adopt an all-hazards approach. It's interesting to note that the G7 and the G20 have recently endorsed the One Health approach, which highlights the intersectionality of human, animal, and environmental health as a key way to reduce the threat of new pandemics. This same approach is being used at a global level to bring together the WHO, FAO, the UN Environment Programme, and the World Organization for Animal Health. Importantly, this same intersectoral and interdisciplinary approach can strengthen food security and make food systems more resilient. We need to look at how we grow our food, including where and what we grow. The good news is that by building resilient, carbon-neutral food systems that enhance biodiversity and promote foods with optimal natural nutrient densities, we can reduce the acute impact of disasters on food security, while also reducing the more chronic, non-communicable disease disasters such as type 2 diabetes. More efficient use of resources can be achieved if human health, agriculture, environment and trade regulations align to ensure that farmers and fishers are appropriately remunerated for producing ecologically sustainable, healthy food that is accessible to and affordable by those who need it most. An example of a One Health approach to food security that yields multiple benefits is a nature-based coral restoration project being implemented in Fiji and Papua New Guinea in collaboration with the Kaima Foundation and Corals for Conservation, with funding support from the World Wildlife Fund and the Australian Government. Benefits from coral restoration include a reduction in the impacts of storm surges, restoration of marine biodiversity, and once habitat regenerates, sustainable harvesting of marine food sources. While waiting for the marine habitat to be restored, local communities are receiving training in Indigenous chicken husbandry and households are restocked with Indigenous birds using a pass-on-the-gift approach. This terrestrial component of the project provides direct and indirect support to household food security and also helps to conserve Indigenous chicken genetic resources. These benefits deliver multiple wins for communities and helps the countries involved to meet 10 of their 17 SDGs. Looking more broadly, in addition to the SDGs, the move to sustainable and circular bioeconomies is, in my opinion, essential to achieve the desired transition to resilient food systems. This new approach to food economies will underpin the successful transition of our food systems. It helps us to document and reward the Indigenous food systems that already meet the criteria of circular food systems. It will also identify and support the transition of other responsible food systems to become economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable. Without a doubt, these changes are substantial, but our health economists, our agricultural economists, and our environmental economists tell us that the return on investment in regenerative, equitable food systems will yield huge benefits to individuals, communities, and to government bottom lines. The sooner we adopt strategic whole-of-government and whole-of-global governance approaches to delivering food systems fit for the 21st century, the better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Now, before our final speaker, let's go again to the app, and you can vote on the 5th poll question. Using only one word, what do you think is important to achieve resilient food systems? Using only one word, what do you think is important to achieve resilient food systems? You can't get this one wrong. It's just whatever your word you're using.
It can they use indigenous language?
Yes.
To use English.
Yes, we could. Connection. Collaboration. Certainly a lot about working together with connections, collaboration, interdependencies, knowledge and investment. You may want to reflect on the largest words, which are the words that people have gone for here, while we listen to our final speaker, who will focus on working together globally and regionally. Vimlendra Sharan is the FAO country representative for Sri Lanka and Maldives. He brings with him nearly 3 decades of national and international government leadership experience, focusing on rural development, agriculture, and food security issues. He has worked as a member of the Indian Administrative Service on agriculture and food policy formulation, and served as the Vice President of the World Food Programme Executive Board, Chairman of the Evaluation Committee at International Fund for Agricultural Development, and a member of the FAO Programme Committee and Council. So the question is this, Mr. Sharan, the current crisis in Sri Lanka, we've all seen this playing out on our screens. To go to your point, Robin, about conflict and anger and how this drives some of these issues, it speaks to the urgency of global food system transformation. How can countries work together globally and regionally to take forward the game-changing solutions identified through the UN Food System Summit, including those recommended by participants in this event, to build a more responsive, agile, and resilient global food system?
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Last speaker, the last session before a 4-day weekend. So thank you for your support, and thank you for being here, because what it does prove is that food systems and resilience of food systems does matter. For the last 2 days, we have been hearing about whether to be proactive or reactive, and I think by the end of today, we would have come to the conclusion that we have to be proactive and build on reduction methodologies, build on resilience so that when the disaster strikes, we find our systems resilient enough to meet the disaster. What is true for infrastructure, because I have found over the last 2 days a lot of emphasis on infrastructure and discussions around infrastructure, is also true for food systems. And why are food systems important? Why is food system resilience important? We heard Stan quote some figures in his introduction. So I'll just give you a few more. 828 million people will go to bed hungry today. And to put that in perspective, that's 30 times the size of Australia. We have a population of about 27 million in Australia, and 828 million people are going to go to bed hungry today. 345 million people are expected to face acute food insecurity in 2022. It's a hunger catastrophe which is facing us. And what I think is going to happen is a world where we will actually be taking away from the hungry to feed the starving. And that will be a really sad day. So, in my view, a perfect storm is brewing, and we have to take action today to ensure that we come out of it unscathed. World population in 2050 is going to be about 10 billion, and we need nearly 50 to 60% more food to feed this population. While we are doing this, we also realize that the production and the distribution systems are highly compromised and constrained. And therefore, when we look at food systems at a global level, we have to look at through a resilience lens. And this resilience lens cannot be looking at only domestic, it has to look at global. And as William rightly pointed out, that you need to strike a balance. It can't be only domestic or only global. We have to look at both. Now, where I come from, Sri Lanka, it's a beautiful country, but going through major economic catastrophe today. Food inflation is at an all-time high of nearly 90%. But like Sri Lanka, there are many other countries facing a similar situation. And all that is happening within the countries cannot be explained by just domestic factors. There are external factors to the country which are impacting food systems. So, what do we have to look at? We actually have to look at global supply chains and how are they functioning, and that's where I will try and limit my next 2, 3, 4 minutes that I have, my comments to. How are the global supply chains really functioning? Now, the Economic Advisors Group 2022 report in the US has come out with a beautiful sentence which says, global supply chains are efficient but brittle. And that's the truth. The pandemic, the conflict, the weather, natural disasters, they can break the global supply chain at any instance. And the sad part of the story is that today in the world, all this is happening at the same time. You have conflicts, you're just coming out of a pandemic with no guarantee as to when it will really end. You have weather situations, you have natural disasters everywhere. All of them are existing all together. So what are the solutions going forward? Now, I'll share a few thoughts. There are no perfect solutions because there is no one perfect answer to the problems which the global food supply chains face. The first thing which is really becoming a buzzword these days amongst policymakers around the world, which I find is go local, go domestic. Domestic production, shorter supply chains are being touted as, in Asia, it's like a solution to all the ills of a global supply chain, but that's not true. There is a lot of merit in going local. There's a lot of merit in shortening your supply chain. But while doing that, we have to understand that every policy has a trade-off. The global supply chains are efficient. They are cheap. You replace them by local, shorter supply chains, you may end up having more costs. And this has to be factored in. You also have to be factoring in the production capacity and capability and capacity in the country. Now, these things need to be balanced out. Do we go domestic? Do we go global? I would say there is no one answer. We have to strike a balance and every country will have a different context in which it will function. Second problem with the global supply chains, and the solution for that needs to be worked out, is the transportation logjams. One ship getting stranded in Suez Canal led to a problem which lasted for more than many months in the world. So the port holdups, the container shortages, the costs, these have really compromised and constrained the supply chain. And we have to bring in digital solutions to track and trace, find alternative routes for the goods to move around globally. Then there is a question of anti-competitive practices. Now, we all know that 4, 5, 6 big conglomerates are controlling the entire food global chain, including seeds. No names taken, but there are just 4 corporations, big corporations, which control more than 50% of seed trade in the world. And when you have a concentration of that nature with minimal regulation, there is always a chance of abuse. And that is something which we need to guard against. My 4th point is about public health and labor shortages. And COVID is a prime example of what happened with the supply chains because of public health. How short or long will the impact of a public health occurrence be will determine how the supply chains are going to function. Are we going into an era where we may face labor shortages for the global supply chains? In which case, what are the solutions that we have to look at? So public health assumes a huge importance to maintain these supply chains to enable food security in different parts of the world. My 5th and my most controversial point, perhaps, is around geopolitics. The geopolitics today, whether it be US-China, whether it be Russia-Ukraine, whether it be the Quad, whether it be China-Taiwan, whatever, whichever part of the world you take, the geopolitics is becoming extremely complicated and extremely combative. And instances of tariffs, sanctions, barriers to entries, these are becoming more and more commonplace. And this is bound to lead to a lot of problem and will impact resilience of food systems globally, definitely amongst the developing and the least developed countries, and I would say even amongst the developed countries. So going forward, the challenges that the food system resilience faces is actually to ensure how to bring about this good balance between domestic and global. And within the global, the challenges which the global food supply chains are facing is multiple, and I don't think there is one solution which is going to give us the answer. So we have to find solutions which are actually speaking to multiple problems, because the supply chains have become very integrated into our food system now. Let me conclude here with just 2 or 3 thoughts that I want to leave with you as you, I think, wind up for the day and go to the riverfront for your evening dinner or drinks. Just think about these. The first one is, are we giving enough importance to food system resilience in this wider discussion around disaster risk reduction? Do we need to bring it more center stage? Does it have to be, I don't mind my saying so, Stephen, but does it have to be the last session of the day, or should it be the opening session of the first day? Now, where do we place food system resilience in the disaster map? My second point, as you go home today, is perhaps to think about this whole idea around domestic and local versus global, and where do we really strike a balance? How do we strike a balance? And my third and last point, which I want you to take away, is to think about whether time has come for us to start thinking about just-in-case global supply chains in place of just-in-time global supply chains. We have lived with global supply chains which were touted to be just-in-time. Has the time now come to start thinking of just-in-case? So I leave you with these 3 thoughts, and I thank all of you who are here in person and all of you who are joining us online for being with us in what we think is an extremely important topic and something which the world really has to take note of going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful session. Obviously, we're dealing with something that goes to the heart, not just of how we live, but the future of peace on the planet, how we work together, how we deal with multiple risks, how we look at developing other food sources that are more resilient and more climate resilient. All of these things are going to be important, and how we work with each other is going to be critical. I think three things that I'm going to walk away from this with very much in my mind, that almost 1 billion people are going to bed hungry tonight, and your point that we may have to take food from the hungry to feed the starving should really worry us all. The fact that if we can deal with the question, the issue of food security, we can halve conflict on the planet. We save lives. We stop people going to war, is a remarkable thing to think about. And of course, I think the other thing to ponder is, do not trust a white man when he tells you how to farm. It'll only come back to bite you. Thank you so much for coming, and please thank our panel.
Fantastic.